My name is Lena Carter, and before I tell you what my parents did, you need to know who I was before cancer tried to erase me. I grew up in a quiet Indiana town where everyone knew everyone. My parents were respected. My dad worked in insurance, my mom volunteered at church, and from the outside, we looked like the kind of family people envied. I was the youngest, the strong one, the girl who never caused trouble. I worked part-time, dreamed of moving to a big city, and believed hard work fixed everything. I trusted my parents completely. I had no reason not to. At 21, I started feeling tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. Bruises appeared where I didn't remember getting hurt. My mom told me I was overthinking it. "You're young," she said. "You're fine." But something inside me knew I was. I went to the doctor alone. When the tests came back, they asked me to sit down. That's when the word cancer entered my life like a thief with no warning. I remember calling my parents from the car, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. My dad was quiet. My mom cried, but not the way I expected. It wasn't the crying of someone ready to fight with you. It was the crying of someone already overwhelmed. I didn't recognize it then. I would later. The day of my official diagnosis, they came with me to the hospital. White walls, fluorescent lights. The doctor explained treatment plans and survival rates. I reached for my mom's hand. She held it for a moment, then gently pulled away. My dad stared at the floor. That small movement broke something in me, even though I didn't yet understand why. At first, I told myself I was imagining things. People handle fear differently, right? I kept smiling. I reassured them. I said, "I'll be okay." That became my role, to protect my parents from my illness, even though I was the one who was sick. Chemotherapy started quickly. The hospital smelled like disinfectant and quiet despair. My parents came the first week. They brought flowers once. Took a photo for Facebook with a caption about staying strong as a family. Then they left early. The second week, they said traffic was bad. The third week, they didn't come at all. I watched other patients arrive surrounded by loved ones, mothers brushing their daughters' hair, fathers cracking jokes, partners holding hands. I learned to keep my eyes down. Envy is ugly, but loneliness is worse. At night, fear hit hardest. The machines hummed while my thoughts screamed. What if I died? What if I survived but was never the same? I texted my parents updates. Sometimes they replied. Sometimes they didn't. Their messages grew shorter, colder, distant, like they were slowly stepping back from a fire they didn't want to be burned by. One night, after throwing up for hours, I called my dad, straight to voicemail. I left a message I barely remember, just my voice breaking, asking him to call me back. He didn't. The next morning, I woke up to a text that changed everything. "We love you, but we can't do this. It's too much." That was the moment I realized something devastating. My parents weren't scared with me. They were scared of me. And without saying it out loud, they had already decided to walk away. That was the day my cancer fight became a fight for survival in every sense of the word, and the day I learned that blood doesn't always mean loyalty. After that text, I understood the truth. My parents weren't coming back. Not in the way I needed them to. Not in the way any child deserves. At 21, facing chemotherapy alone, I felt the weight of the world drop onto me. Not just the illness, but the absence of the two people who were supposed to protect me. At first, I tried to make sense of it. Maybe it was fear. Maybe they didn't know how to handle it. Maybe they thought staying away would protect me. I wanted to believe any of that, but deep down, I knew the real reason. They chose comfort over their daughter. Their life over mine. Every missed appointment, every unanswered call, every empty chair in the hospital waiting room screamed it. The hospital became my only constant. The nurses who laughed softly when they checked my IV, the cleaning staff who asked if I wanted water, the strangers in treatment rooms holding each other for comfort, all of them became my family. I learned to depend on their kindness because my parents' absence left a void no medicine could fill. Chemotherapy was brutal. My hair fell out in clumps. My body ached constantly. Food tasted like cardboard. Nights were worse. The small apartment I rented felt colder without anyone there. I would lie in bed, curled up like a child, staring at the ceiling, wondering how someone could make a promise to love and protect you, only to vanish when you needed them most. I learned quickly that cancer didn't just attack your body. It attacked your sense of worth, your trust in people, your very belief in love. At first, I tried calling them, my dad's voicemail, my mum's messages short and distant. Then came the excuses. I'm busy. I can't make it today. We'll visit next week. Weeks became months. Eventually, they stopped calling. I stopped asking. It hurt less over time, but it left a scar that would never disappear. I felt invisible, forgotten, like a burden they could no longer tolerate. I started keeping a journal, not for them, but for myself. I wrote everything I felt. The pain, the anger, the disbelief, the heartbreak. Writing became my therapy, my proof that I still existed even if my parents acted like I didn't. I wrote about treatments, about nurses who became my surrogate family, about moments when I felt like giving up but didn't. And slowly, the pen became more than a tool, it became a shield. One day, while sitting in the infusion room, I overheard a nurse talking about other patients who had abandoned families. It's tragic, she said softly. You survive the cancer, but some survive it alone. Those words hit me harder than any chemotherapy session. I wasn't imagining it. This wasn't temporary. They had left me, alone. The slow disappearance of my parents taught me something cruel but true. Love can be conditional. People who promise to stay might walk away. And the hardest truth? I couldn't make them love me. I could only survive without them. That realization sparked something inside me, something I would carry through every treatment, every lonely night, every ache in my body. I wasn't just fighting cancer anymore. I was fighting to prove something, that I could endure the worst kind of betrayal and still come out alive. And in that fight, I began to notice a strange thing. While my parents abandoned me, strangers, people I didn't even know, gave me the support they couldn't. And slowly, I started to understand that family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's the people who stay when everyone else walks away. By the end of that year, I wasn't just surviving the cancer. I was surviving the emptiness left behind, learning to carry the weight of abandonment without breaking. And even though my parents were gone from my daily life, I made a silent promise to myself. If I lived, and I would make them feel the consequences of walking away. But that story was far from over. If you want, I can continue with part 3 next, keeping the story at the same intense, 650-word emodio. By the time chemotherapy entered its 3rd cycle, my body no longer felt like it belonged to me. I moved through days in a fog of nausea, pain, and exhaustion so deep it felt permanent. My veins were bruised. My skin was pale and thin. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized the girl staring back. Bald, hollow-eyed. Older than 21 had any right to be. And still, alone. The hospital became a second home. I knew the rhythm of it. The beeping machines, the squeak of nurses' shoes, the smell of antiseptic that never quite faded. I learned which chairs were most comfortable and which nurses were gentle when inserting needles. They asked about my family sometimes. Will anyone be joining you today? I learned to smile and say, not today, like it didn't hurt. There were moments I thought I might break. One afternoon, during a particularly bad treatment, my hands started shaking uncontrollably. Panic rose in my chest, sharp and sudden. I looked around the room. Every other patient had someone with them. I had no one to squeeze my hand, no one to say, you're okay. I closed my eyes and whispered it to myself instead, over and over. You're okay, you're okay, you're okay. That was when Maria, the nurse, noticed. She pulled a chair next to me and stayed longer than she had to. She talked to me about nothing, her dog, her kids, a show she'd been watching. Her voice grounded me. Before she left, she squeezed my shoulder and said, you're stronger than you think. I held onto those words like a lifeline. At night, the fear crept in quietly. Not dramatic, just heavy. What if the cancer came back? What if the treatments didn't work? What if I died alone in a hospital room with no one to claim my body? Those thoughts haunted me. I tried calling my parents again once, just once. I didn't leave a message. I hung up before the beep. That was the moment I realized I was done chasing people who had already decided to leave. Money became another battle. Without family support, bills piled up fast. Rent, medical costs, transportation. I worked remotely when I could, even during treatment days, typing through nausea just to stay afloat. Pride disappeared quickly when survival was at stake. I applied for assistance. I accepted help from charities. I swallowed the shame my parents had taught me to feel about needing help. There were days I wanted to quit. Days I sat on the bathroom floor, weak and crying, wondering what the point was. No parents waiting at the end. No comfort. No guarantee, just pain. But then something unexpected happened. I started noticing small wins. A scan that showed improvement. A morning where I didn't throw up. A laugh shared with another patient who understood exactly how bad it was. Slowly, painfully, I changed. I stopped seeing myself as the girl who had been abandoned. I started seeing myself as the girl who kept showing up anyway. To appointments, to treatments, to life. I celebrated tiny victories, walking a block without resting, eating a full meal, sleeping through the night. Each one felt like rebellion, like proof that cancer hadn't taken me and abandonment hadn't broken me. One afternoon, while waiting for treatment, I overheard a woman talking about her son who had passed away. Her grief was quiet, controlled, devastating. I realized then how close I had come to being a memory instead of a person. That realization lit something fierce inside me. I didn't want to just survive. I wanted to live, fully, loudly, in a way that could never be ignored again. That was the turning point. I stopped hoping my parents would come back. I stopped imagining apologies that would never arrive. I focused on me, on healing, on finishing treatment, on building a future so solid that no one could walk away from it again without consequence. By the end of that year, I rang the bell at the hospital, the one they ring when treatment ends. Nurses clapped. Strangers cheered. I cried harder than I ever had before, not because it was over, but because I had done it alone. And in that moment, I made a quiet decision that would change everything. If I survived this, and I had, then my life would become the one thing my parents could never escape. Not out of anger, not out of hatred, but because survival, when witnessed, is the most powerful revenge of all. When I walked out of that hospital for the last time, it felt like stepping into a new world. The sun hit my face differently. The air smelled sharper, sweeter, almost like it belonged to me. I wasn't the same girl who had entered those white walls months ago. I was stronger, tougher, sharper, and fueled by something far beyond fear. I was alive, and for the first time, completely on my own. The first months after treatment were strange. People congratulated me, strangers in cafes smiled, coworkers sent messages, even journalists reached out asking to share my story. I nodded politely, smiled, and kept going. My parents didn't call. They didn't check in. It didn't matter anymore. The truth had settled in my chest like a steady heartbeat. I didn't need them. I needed only myself and the people who actually stayed. I moved to Chicago for a fresh start. A small apartment above a bookstore, cheap rent, a perfect view of the skyline from my kitchen window. I threw myself into work, anything to prove to myself that I could survive. I finished my degree online, balancing school with odd jobs to pay for rent, food, and therapy. Therapy became sacred. The emotional scars cancer and abandonment left behind weren't visible, but they were deep, and I couldn't ignore them. I had to understand myself before I could rebuild my life. The first real breakthrough came when I started volunteering. I found a nonprofit that helped young cancer patients without family support. I spent hours talking to kids in treatment, sharing what I'd learned. How to navigate hospital corridors alone, how to fight fear, how to rely on your own strength when everyone else walks away. Their gratitude gave me a purpose. Their eyes reminded me of what I had been and what I had survived. Slowly, purpose replaced despair. As the months passed, I noticed a shift. I started receiving recognition for my work. Articles, interviews, social media features, they all celebrated me as a symbol of resilience. I didn't seek fame, but I didn't hide either. I had a story that could inspire, and I was no longer afraid to tell it. Through telling it, I healed further. I was living proof that survival could be loud, undeniable, and transformative. And then, somewhere between rebuilding my career, helping others, and learning to walk without my parents' shadow over me, I realized something else. I was thriving. I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving. I had friends who loved me, colleagues who respected me, a life full of possibility, independent of anyone who had abandoned me. Every step I took, every project I completed, every smile I shared was proof that I didn't need the people who had walked away. Yet even in the middle of this new life, a part of me remembered the emptiness they left behind. The loneliness, the betrayal, the pain, it never fully disappeared. It became fuel. Quiet, steady fuel. Not for hatred, not for destruction, but for proving that their absence would never stop me from becoming the woman I was meant to be. I wanted them to see, if they ever did, that I didn't crumble. I didn't beg. I didn't need them. And then, years later, when my name started appearing in local news for my nonprofit, and the work I'd done to help cancer patients, the world finally saw me. Not the scared girl abandoned in a hospital bed, but a survivor who had refused to be defined by pain. It was around that time that I got the first call from my father. I didn't answer. I let it go to voicemail. And yet, something in me knew that the next chapter, the confrontation, was coming. They had no idea that the girl they left behind had built a life so complete, so unshakable, that it would leave them speechless. By the time I hung up the phone and returned to my work, I smiled. Not bitterly, not angrily, but with certainty. My life was mine. My story was mine. And one day I would give my parents the only truth they deserved, the truth of a daughter who didn't just survive. They would witness that I had thrived without them. For now, though, I focused on living, on thriving, on helping others. And every day that quiet, unshakable strength grew, a reminder that the most powerful revenge is not in hurting others, but in becoming someone they could never break. Years had passed since I last heard from my parents. My life in Chicago had grown into something I was proud of, a career, friends, a community that supported me, and a nonprofit that gave me purpose. I had learned to navigate the world on my own terms, and for the most part, I had stopped thinking about the people who had walked away. I told myself I had moved on, and in a way, I had. But nothing truly prepares you for that first call after years of silence. It came one spring afternoon. I was sitting at my desk, sorting through emails when my phone rang. Unknown number. I hesitated. I almost ignored it, almost let it go to voicemail. Part of me hoped it wasn't them, because I wasn't ready to confront the past. Another part of me, the small, curious part that had never quite gone away, wanted to know, wanted to see if they had changed. I answered, "Hello." "Lena, it's Dad," the voice said. It was softer than I remembered, older, strained. My heart skipped, but I didn't panic. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind for years, though never out loud. I stayed calm, careful not to let any emotion slip through. He went on, I've seen some of the stories online. About you, about your work, I'm proud of you." His voice faltered. "I never realized, I never thought," he trailed off. I let him stumble through the guilt that I knew had haunted him all these years. I didn't respond immediately. I had nothing to say, not yet. Not until I decided what I wanted. He hesitated, then finally asked the question I had imagined, feared, and dreamed about for years. "Can we meet? Just talk." I froze for a moment. My mind raced. I had built a life where they weren't part of the daily equation. My life was full and bright without them. And yet, I understood the power this meeting could have. Not for them, but for me. This was my moment, my chance to see how far I had come. Finally, I said, "Yes, we can meet." The weeks that followed were strange. I rehearsed in my head every scenario. Would they apologize sincerely or just mouth empty words? Would I feel anger or indifference? Would the meeting break me or show them that I was unbreakable? Every night I imagined standing across from them, poised, calm, carrying years of unspoken words. When the day finally came, I chose a quiet cafe, neutral territory. Not their home, not mine, somewhere public, somewhere I could leave if I needed to. I arrived early, scanning the small space, imagining the moment I'd finally see them after all those years. My parents arrived separately. My mother, eyes red from crying, hands shaking slightly. My father, older, heavier, a man I barely recognized. Both looked nervous, unsure, like children caught in their own mistakes. They smiled awkwardly. I smiled back, measured, calm, confident. The years of absence, the loneliness, the abandonment, they had taught me control. I let them sit. I let them talk first. They babbled apologies, excuses, weak attempts at justification. Their words were familiar, rehearsed. I didn't interrupt. I let them speak. And with every sentence, I felt my own power grow. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I had survived alone. I had built a life without them. And now, finally, they had to face the consequences of walking away. The quiet, undeniable truth that I was no longer the scared girl they abandoned in a hospital bed. When my father finally looked at me, eyes wide, I knew the question would come. The one I had waited for years to hear. Can you forgive us? I took a deep breath, leaned back in my chair, and smiled. Not bitterly, not cruelly, but with a calm, quiet certainty. Because the words I was about to say would leave them speechless. The cafe felt impossibly quiet the moment my parents settled into their chairs. It was a neutral space, but in that stillness, every memory I'd buried over the years rushed back. The long nights in the hospital, the loneliness, the anger, the tears. I felt it all like a weight pressing against my chest. And yet, I was calm. Every cell in my body told me I had the upper hand now. I had survived without them, rebuilt my life without them, and in this moment, they could see it for themselves. My mother's eyes were red, rimmed from crying, her hands folded tightly on the table. My father looked smaller than I remembered, shoulders slumped, a man who seemed to carry the guilt of every missed appointment, every cold text, every "we can't do this." They were nervous, awkward, unsure of how to face the consequences of abandoning their daughter during the most critical months of her life. They began to talk first, fumbling through apologies, words that sounded rehearsed, like lines memorized for a play. "We were scared," my mother said, her voice trembling. "We didn't know how to handle it," my father added. "I thought we were protecting you by staying away. I never wanted to hurt you." I listened. I nodded, polite but unreadable. Their voices rang hollow in my ears. I could feel the weight of years of abandonment, but I didn't let it control me. I had rehearsed this moment countless times, not to yell, not to cry, not to beg, but to show them calmly and undeniably that I had survived, that I was unbroken. My mother leaned forward. We just want you to understand. Can you forgive us?" Her words were like ice in my chest. She expected tears, softening, some form of mercy. She expected the scared, vulnerable girl she had abandoned to crawl back into her arms. But that girl no longer existed. I took a slow breath. I let the silence stretch. Let it hang like a mirror between us. In that silence, I saw the truth in their eyes. Fear. Real fear. Not the fear of sickness. Not the fear of life. But the fear of facing the consequences of abandoning me. The fear of seeing the daughter they left behind and recognizing that she didn't need them. That she had thrived without them. I looked at my father first. The man who had missed my worst nights, ignored my cries, chosen his comfort over my life. I could see him waiting for the words he hoped would heal everything. I could feel his heart racing. I smiled gently, a smile that carried years of strength, survival, and quiet judgment. Then I spoke, slowly, deliberately, letting each word hit with precision. "I survived without you." 4 words, simple, clear, final, no yelling, no theatrics, just truth. My father's face went pale. His mouth opened, then closed. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Neither of them spoke. The cafe, bustling with quiet conversation around us, seemed to fade. It was as if the words had sucked all the air out of the room. For years, they had imagined this meeting would be about reconciliation, about apologies and forgiveness. But it was about truth. And the truth was I had survived, thrived, built a life, found strength without them. I didn't linger. I finished my coffee, placed a few bills on the table, and stood up. Their eyes followed me, wide, stunned, uncomprehending. They had no idea how to respond, no words to counter the reality of their daughter's survival. I leaned down slightly, just enough to make sure they heard me clearly one last time. "I am better than you ever imagined." And then I walked out. That moment didn't feel like victory in the traditional sense. There were no cheers, no applause, but inside I felt something far stronger: power, closure, freedom. I had faced them. I had confronted the people who had abandoned me during the darkest time of my life, and I had walked away, whole, unshaken, and unbroken. From that moment on, my life was mine entirely. The past could no longer touch me. Their presence or absence was irrelevant. And in that, I found a kind of revenge far more potent than anger ever could be. Living fully, thriving completely, and showing them, in the quietest yet loudest way possible, that I didn't need them to survive. Walking out of that cafe, I felt lighter than I had in years. Every step echoed the strength I had built while my parents chose to abandon me. Their absence had once felt like a wound, raw and endless. Now it felt like fuel that had shaped me, hardened me, and made me unstoppable. For years, I had rehearsed the moment I would confront them. I imagined different scenarios: tears, anger, begging, apologies. I imagined the frail girl I once was, hiding behind their protection, hoping for love that never came. But the girl who walked out that day wasn't her anymore. She had become someone stronger, someone who didn't need their approval, someone who could define her own life, her own worth, and her own revenge. The power of those 4 words, spoken at the right moment, was not in the letters themselves, but in what they carried. Every memory, every night I spent crying alone, every chemo treatment, every lonely Christmas, every silent birthday, the weight of all of it condensed into a single statement. I survived without you. I knew my father had expected a different outcome. Maybe he imagined tears, maybe a fragile apology, maybe a chance to make amends. But the truth I offered was heavier than any apology or plea. It was the quiet, undeniable reality that his abandonment had not broken me. It had forged me. It had transformed my pain into a life they could no longer touch. My mother tried to speak after I said it, her lips trembling, but no sound came out. My father opened his mouth, then closed it again, like he had lost the ability to argue with reality. The room felt suspended in time. The world moved around them, but inside that cafe, only the truth remained, and they couldn't escape it. After years of imagining revenge as something loud, dramatic, or cruel, I realized that the quiet, irreversible truth, was more devastating. It wasn't about punishment. It wasn't about yelling or shamming. It was about presence. My presence, fully realized, thriving without them, living in a way that made them powerless. Every success, every accomplishment, every smile I had earned was a silent confirmation that I didn't need them to survive. I left them there, stunned, uncomprehending, and unsure how to respond. Their silence followed me for days in my mind. I didn't feel guilt or remorse or hesitation, only peace. I had reclaimed control over my own story. They had no part in it anymore, except as reminders of what I had endured. And in that, I found a deeper satisfaction than I ever imagined. When I returned home, I called my closest friends. I didn't tell them what I said exactly. I didn't need to. They knew what it meant. I had stood up to the people who had abandoned me. I had faced my past without crumbling. And the way I had done it, calm, composed, unstoppable, was worth celebrating. Even now, when I think back on that day, I smile. Not out of malice, not out of bitterness, but because I finally understand something profound. The most powerful revenge isn't in hurting someone else. It's in surviving, thriving, and showing the world, especially those who doubted you, that they were powerless to break you. That is what I did. That is what I am. And if they ever reflect on that day, if they ever remember the 4 words that left them speechless, I hope they understand. Abandoning me didn't stop me. Leaving me alone didn't break me. And they will never forget that I survived. Not just survived, but became unstoppable. After that day, life felt lighter, freer, and infinitely more mine. Walking away from my parents in the cafe wasn't just a physical action, it was a declaration. A statement that their choices, their absence, and their failures could no longer touch me. I had survived cancer. I had survived abandonment. I had survived everything they had left behind, and I had thrived despite it. In the weeks after our confrontation, I reflected on everything that had led me to that moment. The loneliness, the despair, the nights of crying alone in hospital beds, the endless calls that went unanswered, they had all forged me into someone unshakable. Every sleepless night, every pain-filled day, every time I had clung to hope alone had prepared me for this. And now I could see clearly. My life was mine, entirely and irrevocably. My parents, they tried to reach out after that day. Emails, short texts, hesitant phone calls, but it was too late. The power dynamic had shifted. I was no longer the scared, vulnerable girl they could manipulate or neglect. I was a woman with strength, purpose, and a life that didn't require them. Their attempts at reconciliation were polite, careful, almost fearful, and I received them with the calm detachment of someone who had already moved beyond the past. The most satisfying part wasn't anger. It wasn't bitterness. It wasn't revenge in the traditional sense. The most satisfying part was knowing that they were powerless. They had abandoned me in the worst moments of my life, yet I had not only survived, I had flourished. Every success, every smile, every life I touched through my nonprofit reminded me that they could not undo my achievements. They could not erase the woman I had become. And slowly, I began to understand the quiet, terrifying power of that forward statement. I survived without you. It wasn't just a sentence. It was the truth of my existence, a truth that they would carry with them forever. Every time they thought of me, it would echo in their minds, not because I sought to punish them, but because my life itself became the proof of what they lost. I poured my energy into helping others, using my experience to lift those who felt abandoned and powerless. Cancer had tried to take my life. My parents had tried to take my hope. But I refused to let either succeed. Every young patient I helped, every story I shared, every life I touched was a living testament to resilience. Their absence had taught me how to be unstoppable, how to rely on myself, and how to turn pain into power. Friends, colleagues, and strangers all became part of the family I had always needed. I learned that love isn't defined by blood. It's defined by presence, support, and loyalty. Those who walked away taught me that some people will never show up. And that's okay. Because when you survive without them, when you thrive without them, you realize that the only approval that truly matters is your own. I still think about my parents sometimes. I imagine what they feel when they remember that cafe. The shock, the silence, the realization that the child they abandoned is now unshakable, thriving, and entirely independent. They live with that truth every day, a truth they created and cannot undo. And I live with peace, with purpose, with triumph. My revenge was never about destruction. It was about living fully, boldly, and authentically. It was about showing them and the world that the girl they left behind became more than they could ever imagine. I became unstoppable. I became powerful. I became free. And that, in the end, is the story I tell today. The story of abandonment, survival, and the quiet, undeniable power of a woman who refused to be broken. Because surviving is not just living, it is victory. And thriving after betrayal, that is the ultimate revenge.